Somewhere between Dallas and the hill country, time has a habit of getting lazy. There are gas stations where the pumps still look like they belong in a Jimmy Carter speech. Diners where the waitress calls you Han and means it. Dance halls where the boot scootin' hasn't changed since Waylon was alive, the neon is original, and nobody ever got around to installing Wi-Fi. And nobody's asking for it either. These are 17 places in Texas that feel like the 1970s never ended. Place 17, Luckenbach, Texas, Hill Country. Population, 3. That is the official head count for Luckenbach. 3 people. But on any given weekend, a few hundred show up anyway, because Luckenbach has always operated less like a town and more like a shared idea about what life is supposed to feel like. Folklorist and genuine Texas character Hondo Crouch purchased what was essentially a ghost town in 1970 for $30,000. The place had about 3 people in it by then, down from nearly 500 at its peak in 1904. Crouch turned it into a music gathering spot, started throwing festivals with names like the Ladies State Chili Bust and the Mud Dauber Festival, and invited his friends, some of whom happened to be Willie Nelson, Waylon Jennings, and Jerry Jeff Walker. The town already had a general store and a dance hall, originally built in the 1800s to serve the German farming community. Crouch simply made them a destination again. By 1977, Waylon Jennings and Willie Nelson had immortalized the place in their song, not named after a person or a landmark, but simply after the town itself, which tells you everything about what kind of place it is. Luckenbach became something between a pilgrimage site and a punchline, the kind of place people make fun of until they actually show up and sit under a 500-year-old oak tree with a cold beer while someone nearby plays guitar for no apparent reason other than the fact that it feels right. The whole town today is still a general store, a dance hall, a beer garden, and a handful of buildings. There's still live music most evenings. The pickers' circles under the oaks are still spontaneous and informal and exactly what you hope they'll be. And the vibe is still, improbably, exactly what it was in 1972, which is to say, the kind of unhurried, unpolished, total lack of hustle that the modern world has essentially made illegal everywhere else. One longtime visitor described it simply: everybody really is somebody in Luckenbach, and in a world that has never been more interested in who you are and what you have accomplished, that is a genuinely radical thing to be able to say. Place 16, Gruene Hall, New Braunfels. If Luckenbach is Texas country music's spiritual center, Gruene Hall is its oldest still-standing church. Built in the 1870s by the Gruene family who founded the cotton community, it has been operating continuously as a dance hall since then, making it the oldest continuously operating dance hall in all of Texas. George Strait played there in the early days of his career, when he was still just another guy from the hill country who could really sing. Lyle Lovett, Jerry Jeff Walker, and countless others have stood on that same stage, under that same ceiling, in front of those same creaking wooden floors. Gruene itself nearly disappeared after the cotton industry collapsed and the Great Depression hollowed it out. By the 1970s, most of the buildings were abandoned, and the town was functionally a ghost town. Then, an architecture student inventoried the remaining historic structures and convinced developers to list the town on the National Register of Historic Places in 1975, rather than bulldoze it for condominiums. A decision that looks better with every passing year. Pat Molak purchased Gruene Hall in 1975 and revived it. Walking into Gruene Hall today feels like time travel done well. The wooden floors creak. The ceiling fans turn slowly overhead. The stage is small and close and low. The beer is cold. There is no smoke machine, no theatrical lighting rig, no digital backdrop. Just a band, a room, and whoever showed up. Every weekend, people two-step under the same roof, where multiple generations of Texans have done exactly the same thing, to similar music, with the same general level of enthusiasm. The Guadalupe River runs behind the town. The gristmill restaurant, built inside the ruins of the old cotton gin, hangs over the riverbank, and the water tower that defined Gruene's skyline since the cotton era still stands above it all. It is not trying to be anything. It has just been exactly what it is for a very long time. which in Texas counts for a great deal. Place 15, Top-Notch Hamburgers, Austin. Opened in 1971 on Bonnet Road in Austin, Top-Notch Hamburgers is one of those places where the sign alone is worth the drive. The original marquee still lights up at dusk. The drive-in ordering stations still work. The burgers are still flame-grilled. The onion rings are still the thing people argue about on the way home. Richard Linklater shot scenes for the 1993 film Dazed and Confused here, a movie set in 1976 Texas, and the reason he chose Top-Notch is the same reason you should visit. It already looked like the 1970s without anyone having to try. The wood paneling, the vinyl chairs, the car hop service, all of it is still there because the original family ran it for 39 years without changing much. And the people who took over in 2010 understood that fixing something that isn't broken is a peculiarly American form of self-sabotage. A regular customer put it plainly. The signs say, since 1971, and the decor matches, and that's exactly the point. Place 14, Marfa, West Texas. Marfa is the strangest entry on this list, which is saying something. In 1971, minimalist artist Donald Judd arrived in this tiny ranching and railroad town in the Chihuahuan Desert and started buying buildings. He had grown frustrated with New York's art world and wanted somewhere he could install large-scale works permanently, without the interference of galleries or collectors. He eventually transformed an entire decommissioned army base, Fort D.A. Russell, into a permanent installation space. Judd's large-scale concrete works and gleaming aluminum boxes became the foundation of what is now the Chinati Foundation, which he founded to preserve both his own work and that of other artists he admired. The result is a town of about 1,600 people where cattle ranchers and contemporary artists have been coexisting for decades. The Central Marfa Historic District preserves remarkable adobe and southwestern architecture unchanged since Judd began reshaping the town's identity in the early 1970s. The Hotel Paisano, where the cast of the 1956 film Giant stayed during production, James Dean, Elizabeth Taylor, Rock Hudson, still operates and carries that mid-century desert atmosphere with genuine grace. A massive mural on the outside of one building pays homage to those three actors, a reminder that Marfa has been a destination for outsiders with large imaginations since long before Judd arrived. The Marfa lights, unexplained glowing orbs visible from the official viewing area on US 90 east of town, have been baffling visitors since the 1800s and have offered no explanation in the intervening century and a half. There are galleries, a single stoplight, an Italian deli, a digital art studio, and the famous Prada Marfa installation sitting out on US 90 like a philosophical question someone left in the desert and forgot to retrieve. Most of what defines Marfa was set in the 1970s when Judd arrived and began his slow, deliberate transformation of the town. And almost none of that has changed. The art is still there. The cattle are still there. The desert is still very, very much there. Place 13, Tip Top Cafe, San Antonio. Since 1938, the Tip Top Cafe on Fredericksburg Road in San Antonio has been doing essentially one thing, serving Texans the kind of food their grandparents ate in the kind of room their grandparents sat in. The chrome pie case near the counter still showcases the same sky-high meringue recipes. The chicken fried steak still hangs over the edge of the plate. The current aesthetic is pure 1970s. Worn counter, classic booth seating, the kind of dim lighting that makes everything feel a little warmer than it is. 3 generations of the Dewey's family maintained not just the recipes, but the entire mid-century atmosphere, which is considerably harder than it sounds. Any restaurant can slap a vintage sign on the wall. It takes genuine commitment, or perhaps genuine stubbornness, to leave the room completely alone for 50 years. The Tip Top closes around 7 p.m., which is another signal that you are operating on different time standards here. The world outside stays open until 2 a.m. The Tip Top is done by dinner. Place 12, Magnolia Cafe, Austin. The neon sign outside Magnolia Cafe reads, "Sorry, we're open." It is one of the great signs in Texas. And it is very, very Austin. The kind of quirky, self-deprecating humor that the city ran on in the 1970s when musicians were broke, rents were low, and nobody had coined the phrase, "keep Austin weird" yet because it wasn't necessary to say it out loud. The cafe has been open since the 1970s and became a gathering place for musicians pulling late sets. People like Willie Nelson and Stevie Ray Vaughan were said to have been fueled here after midnight performances. The pancakes are the size of steering wheels. The menu runs around the clock. When one location faced closure threats, Austinites rallied like it was a civic emergency, showing up in numbers and volume that would have been appropriate for a much larger cause. That kind of loyalty doesn't come from the food alone, though the food earns it. It comes from the fact that Magnolia Cafe represents a version of Austin that predates the tech boom, the brunch lines, the $12 juice drinks, and the general sense that every square foot of the city is being converted into something more profitable. A version where you could roll in at 2 a.m. smelling like guitar resin and receive the same welcome as everyone else. A version that, against considerable odds, still exists in pockets like this one. Place 11. The Salt Lick, Driftwood. There is an argument to be made that the Salt Lick, located in Driftwood about 15 miles southwest of Austin on FM 1826, is less a restaurant and more a theology. The open pit, visible from the dining room, the smoke drifting through the air before you even find a parking spot, has been burning continuously since the restaurant opened in 1967. The land has been in the Roberts family since the 1800s, and the original recipe for the sauce goes back even further, passed down through generations. The menu is barbecue, served in the hill country way, communal, generous, and without a great deal of fuss. For decades, the operation was cash only, a rule that has since been updated, but that told you everything you needed to know about the priorities of the people running it. The sweet and tangy house sauce sticks to your fingers. The brisket rests under a sheen of smoke. Sausage links coil on the plate alongside ribs that have been cooking since well before your arrival. Kids chase each other between the oak trees. Adults lean back and slow down. Weekend evenings bring live music under the open sky. The whole place smells like the most honest advertisement for Texas that has ever existed, and it has smelled that way since the Johnson administration. Nothing about the essential experience has changed since the 1970s, when the Salt Lick became a destination rather than just a family barbecue spot. And nothing needs to. Place 10, Paris Coffee Shop, Fort Worth. Dating back to 1926, Paris Coffee Shop in Fort Worth has outlasted trends, recessions, 2 world wars, and what feels like every passing food fad of the 20th and 21st centuries. The mid-century feel is not recreated, it simply never left. The counter stools, the pie case, the booths worn smooth by nearly a century of elbows and coffee cups, all of it carries the genuine, unmanufactured patina that interior designers spend considerable money trying to replicate and almost always fail to achieve convincingly. Fort Worth workers, Stockyards regulars, and people who have been ordering the same breakfast since 1975 all share the same dining room here. The eggs are cooked exactly how you ordered them. The bacon is actually crispy. The hash browns hold together on the fork. These sound like minimum standards, but any regular diner goer knows how frequently those minimums go unmet. Paris Coffee Shop has met them consistently, without deviation, for nearly 100 years. There is something almost stubborn about that, in the best possible way. Place 9. Coffee Cup Family Restaurant, Hiko. Sitting at 305 South Pecan Street in the small town of Hiko, the Coffee Cup Family Restaurant has been the community's anchor since 1947. The building is classic small-town Texas storefront. Big windows facing the street, a hand-painted sign that looks like it hasn't been updated since before the bicentennial, mismatched tables inside, vintage Coca-Cola signs on the walls, and a rotating pie counter that the locals treat less like a menu item and more like a public utility. The burgers are thick and cooked to order on a flat top that has been sizzling since Truman was president. The chocolate meringue and buttermilk pies have their own loyal followings. The kind of following that is less about enthusiasm and more about habit, which is the most durable form of loyalty a restaurant can earn. And then there's the Billy the Kid angle. Eco has long maintained, with considerable conviction and some historical support, that the outlaw Billy the Kid survived his famous 1881 encounter with Pat Garrett and lived out his later years in the area under the name Ollie Brushy Bill Roberts. The walls of the coffee cup are covered in photographs, newspaper clippings, and memorabilia related to this claim. The Billy the Kid Museum just down the street expands on the theory at greater length. Whether you believe it or not, the restaurant itself is completely real. The kind of small-town Texas diner that exists in everyone's memory of a road trip through the state, even when that memory is of a place they've never actually been. Place 8. Stockyards, National Historic District, Fort Worth. You don't need to go back to the 1970s to feel the past in the Fort Worth Stockyards. You need to go back much further to the 1800s, when Fort Worth was a major stop on the cattle drives and the stockyards were the beating commercial heart of the region. But the Stockyards has its own specific 1970s character, the era when the district was rescued from decline and reimagined as a historic destination rather than allowed to simply fade after the meatpacking industry moved on. Cattleman's Steakhouse, operating inside the district since 1947, still carries the atmosphere of working ranching Texas, mesquite smoke drifting through the room, booths worn smooth by decades of use, steaks ordered by weight and cooked with the kind of directness that serious beef people appreciate. The bone-in ribeye doesn't need a narrative. It just needs to be cooked right. The twice-daily cattle drive, genuine Texas longhorns herded down Exchange Avenue by working cowboys, has been running since 1999. But the streets they walk haven't changed much since the 1970s. Preservation efforts shaped the district into what it remains today. White Elephant Saloon has been pouring since 1887 and still brings in live country and western swing on most nights. On weekend nights, honky-tonk music spills simultaneously out of multiple venues. The neon has been there long enough to be original. The boots on the sidewalk belong to people who wear them daily, not on occasion, and the whole district still smells faintly of livestock, which is either a complaint or a compliment, depending entirely on who you ask. Place 7. Mel's Country Cafe, Tomball. Northwest of Houston, on Stanalind Road in Tomball, Mel's Country Cafe has been serving this community since the late 1970s. It has survived fire, changed ownership, and more trends than anyone wants to count. None of it changed the core of the operation. Enormous portions, friendly service, checkered tablecloths, wood paneling, and the kind of chicken fried steak that requires you to reorganize the rest of your afternoon. The Mega Mel Burger is the kind of thing you order on a dare and finish with quiet satisfaction. The onion rings are the kind that people remember and return for. And the dining room still hums with the sound of locals discussing everything from local sports to county politics, with the same comfort you get in any room where people have been gathering in the same place for 40 years. One visitor described sitting near a table of locals who were daring each other to finish the burgers. Nobody was filming it for the internet. That alone tells you what kind of place this is. Place 6. Avalon Drug Company, Houston. Located at 2417 Westheimer Road in Houston, the Avalon is one of the city's most enduring breakfast and lunch institutions. The original building opened in 1967 as a neighborhood gathering spot, and the interior has held on to that particular late 1960s and early 1970s character. A-frame architecture, vinyl booths, a long counter with spinning stools, and a neon sign that glows through Houston's perpetually humid air like a beacon. Over 30 varieties of pie are available daily. The Bayou Goo, loaded with chocolate and pecans, has its own loyal following, which in Houston means something measurable. Breakfast served all day means that pancakes at midnight are not only possible, but encouraged, a policy that has made the Avalon a gathering point for night shift workers, musicians finishing late sets, and anyone who has ever had the kind of evening that ends better with pie than with sleep. Houston is a city that tears things down faster than most, replacing perfectly good buildings with parking structures and then replacing those with something else entirely. Against that backdrop, the fact that the Avalon has been exactly where it is, looking almost exactly as it does, since the Johnson administration, qualifies as a minor miracle, or maybe just stubbornness. In Houston, it's hard to tell the difference, and it doesn't matter. Place 5. Gruene General Store. Gruene. Right in the heart of the Gruene Historic District, the Gruene General Store has occupied the same building since the original mercantile era of the town. Part antique shop, part Texas goods purveyor, the store carries the kind of inventory that rewards slow browsing, the kind you can only do comfortably when the world outside isn't going anywhere fast, which in Gruene, it generally isn't. The building itself is the draw as much as anything inside it. The original wooden floors, the pressed tin ceiling, the smell of old wood and leather, it puts you in a specific gear that no amount of themed retail design can replicate. You can't manufacture authentic patina, you just have to wait for it, and Gruene has been waiting since the 1870s. Place 4, Star Drugstore, Galveston. On the Strand in Galveston, Star Drugstore sits at 510 23rd Street and is frequently described as the oldest operating drugstore in Texas. The horseshoe counter, the original vintage tiles on the floor, the soda fountain still pulling milkshakes, all of it creates the sensation of walking onto a film set that never wrapped production. Except it's real, and the burger is actually good. Galveston has its own complicated relationship with time. The island was devastated by the 1900 hurricane, the deadliest natural disaster in American history, and rebuilt itself slowly over the decades that followed. The Strand, once known as the Wall Street of the Southwest in the city's late 1800s commercial peak, went through its own decades of decline before preservation efforts in the 1970s brought it back. Star Drugstore has been part of the Strand's story through all of it. Sitting at the counter, watching staff move between the grill and the fountain, you feel the island slow down to match your appetite. Salt air comes through whenever the door opens. The neon glows over the Strand outside. Galveston's long, layered history hangs in the air alongside everything else, and the Star Drugstore feels like the perfect place to just sit in the middle of it. Place 3. Blue Bonnet Cafe, Marble Falls. The Blue Bonnet Cafe in Marble Falls has been feeding hill country Texans since 1929. It is the kind of place where you understand immediately, without being told, that the pie is the whole point. Mile-high meringue, chocolate cream, buttermilk, the institution known informally as Pie Happy Hour, where discounted slices appear in the late afternoon as the light starts to go golden over the river, has drawn people off the highway for decades. The blue plate specials, meatloaf, pot roast, chicken fried steak, have not substantially changed in decades. The recipes are guarded the way family heirlooms are guarded, carefully, without any particular enthusiasm for sharing. The coffee is bottomless and arrives without being asked for a second time. The service treats you like a neighbor, which in small-town Texas is the highest possible form of hospitality because it is not performed, it just is. Locals have been known to drive from Austin specifically for a slice of coconut cream pie and then drive back, which is roughly an hour each way, and tells you everything you need to know about the Blue Bonnets standing in hill country life. The door swings often. Greetings sound familiar even when they shouldn't. The hill country moves at its own pace, and the Blue Bonnet has always been right there with it. Place 2. Joe T. Garcia's, Fort Worth. Joe T. Garcia's opened in 1935 on North Commerce Street in Fort Worth and has been feeding the city on Tex-Mex ever since. But the reason it belongs on a list of places that feel like the 1970s never ended is the patio. A sprawling courtyard of fountains, tile work, and the kind of collective laughter that sounds exactly the same as it has for 50 years. The menu is famously short, 2 options, enchiladas or fajitas, served family style in quantities designed for a table that has decided to commit. Margaritas come by the pitcher and are priced accordingly. The enchiladas arrive cheek to cheek, cheese bubbling at the edges. The fajitas come with tortillas and the expectation that you will handle the rest yourself. You stay longer than you planned because the garden keeps you there. Children wander between the fountain and the table. Adults lose track of the time, which is the stated purpose of a place like this. In a city that has changed enormously since the 1930s, with downtown Fort Worth unrecognizable now from what it was even 30 years ago, Joe T. Garcia's patio remains almost aggressively unchanged. Decades just accumulate there quietly, without anyone asking them to move along. One longtime Fort Worth resident said that when life gets complicated, their solution is always the same: pitcher of margaritas at Joe T's. The simplicity of that answer is the whole point. Place 1. Mary's Cafe, Strawn. If you have never driven off Interstate 20 into the small town of Strawn, population a few hundred, located about 90 miles west of Fort Worth in Palo Pinto County, you may not know that Mary's Cafe exists. That is either a failure of the state's tourism infrastructure or the best-kept secret in West Texas, depending on your perspective. Mary's has been operating since the 1970s, with virtually nothing changed about how or what they cook. The room is small. The menu is simple. The decor is whatever accumulated over decades without anyone making deliberate choices about it. And the chicken fried steak is the kind of chicken fried steak that becomes the benchmark against which all other chicken fried steaks are measured. For the rest of your life, involuntarily, whether you want that responsibility or not. Texans talk about Mary's chicken fried steak the way they talk about things they are genuinely proud of. Not as a quirky local attraction, not as a nostalgia trip, as a serious claim. The gravy is cream. The breading holds. The portion requires its own spatial planning before it arrives. And the line on weekends is real, which means people are driving out of their way to wait in it. One regular said simply, "There is nowhere else to go for chicken fried steak." And in Strawn, with that particular tone, that ends the conversation permanently. Texas has a funny relationship with time. In the cities, it moves fast. Faster every year, it seems. With new construction, and new arrivals, and new everything layering over whatever was there before. New roads appear. Old neighborhoods change their names. The skylines get more vertical and more anonymous and more interchangeable with every other skyline in every other growing American city. But out on the farm-to-market roads, in the hill country, in the old neighborhood diners, and the small-town courthouses, and the dance halls with screened doors that clap shut behind you, time still moves at its own pace, and sometimes it stops entirely in exactly the right way. Sometimes you pull off the highway into a town you've never heard of, walk into a room that smells like coffee and fryer oil and old wood, and sit down across from someone who calls you hon and means it. And you realize that the 1970s never really ended here. They just kept going quietly without making a fuss about it. These are 17 places in Texas that know exactly what they are and have been without apology for 50 years. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to our channel so you never miss out on more fascinating stories.